Cloudflare just bought VoidZero, the company behind Vite, Vitest, Rolldown and Oxc, basically half the modern JavaScript toolchain, and naturally with news like this, the internet has its opinions, so let's just dive in and see what Cloudflare is promising here, and whether we should be worried, or if it could actually be good news. So the entire VoidZero company is joining Cloudflare, Evan You included, and all of the tools like Vite, Vitest, Rolldown, Oxc, and Vite Plus are going along with it. Just to be extra clear though, Vue is not included as part of this deal, that remains completely separate and community governed. Now obviously when something like this happens, one of the first things they say is that nothing is going to change. All of their projects are going to remain open source, stay vendor agnostic, and remain community driven. They also put $1 million into a separate V ecosystem fund, which is going to be run by the core team and used to pay maintainers and contributors, which I do think is a pretty nice touch. Out of the two companies, I think it's pretty clear why VoidZero took this deal. They get a stable home at Cloudflare and no longer have to worry about making profit for their VCs, because if you didn't know, VoidZero actually raised $17 million, and I'll come back to why in a bit. More broadly though, this also seems like a trend of big tech at the moment. We saw that Bun was bought by Anthropic, Cloudflare bought Astro a few months back, OpenAI bought the team behind UV, they're all betting big on developer tooling. From Cloudflare's point of view, you can see what got them interested in Vite. Their weekly downloads of their Vite plugin have been going absolutely astronomical recently, and these numbers would roughly suggest that about 10% of Vite users are also using the Vite Cloudflare plugin, which is 10 million weekly downloads, and Vite itself is also having a pretty crazy year of growth. If we put aside the fact that a lot of that is going to be AI related, I do think another important piece of the puzzle is it's just made Cloudflare way more accessible to developers, being way easier to use than it was before. I personally have migrated a lot of my sites recently from Vercel to Cloudflare, mainly because I switched to TanStack, but I found that Cloudflare is actually fairly easy to use now, which if you told me that 2 years ago, I probably would have laughed at you, as they have a bit of a history of terrible developer experience and UI dashboard hell, and that's what pushed a lot of people over to Vercel. Now Cloudflare is definitely not perfect yet, but it is starting to improve, and this is where VoidZero comes back in. If you remember a few months ago, VoidZero actually announced a new deployment platform called Void, which was designed for Vite, but the infrastructure behind the scenes was on Cloudflare. What Vercel is to AWS, Void would essentially be for Cloudflare. We actually had an episode of the podcast where Evan came on to discuss some of this, so subscribe for more great chats like that. It seems with this acquisition that Void is going to be shut down, and apparently they are planning on open sourcing it in the future, which is pretty cool to see. But in general, Cloudflare is just going to take the lessons that Void was learning about simplifying deploying to Cloudflare and apply it to their own CLIs and tools. They say the Cloudflare CLI should feel exactly like Vite, as it will be built on top of it, but they're going to have commands like cfdev, which is just a superset of ViteDev, but with the Cloudflare runtime and bindings built in, and they also want a cfdeploy command that makes deploying a Vite app to Cloudflare super simple. So yeah, I'm actually a little bit excited to see how the Vite team is going to help Cloudflare fix their developer experience. Now obviously the elephant in the room is AI, and I think Cloudflare here saw what was going to happen if they didn't improve. Pretty much every front end outside of Next.js is being built using Vite, and if Cloudflare didn't support that well, AI just isn't going to use it. If we take a look at the research on what Claude actually chooses, you can see Vercel are just absolutely dominant in AI recommendations, and these companies are battling it out to be the default for deployment, so acquiring the default for the tooling seems like a pretty strong step towards making that happen. The big worry with all of this though is, of course they always say that nothing changes, but at the end of the day, a business is a business, and they don't spend large sums of money just to not get anything in return. VoidZero, as I said, previously raised $17 million, which might help frame how much Cloudflare paid for it, and when you acquire a team, eventually that team might start working on your priorities, even if nobody forces them to. It's just the nature of possibly liking your employer and being a little more lenient. I also saw some comments on Hacker News about how Cloudflare bought a company called Bastion Zero before, and this comment was claiming that the tool decayed, bugs piled up, and they stopped publishing changelogs, and then everyone just got an email saying it was shutting down in a month. I personally don't know too much about that situation, and I couldn't see too much online, but again, I might be a bit too optimistic here, but I think Vite is too big to fail, and this is a pretty different situation. The one concern I can understand, though, is consolidation. It seems like it's the new thing for these popular open source tools to be acquired, and they're usually acquired by companies trying to own the full stack from development to deployment, and Vite has always been a neutral tool. And while they promise to continue to be, feeling a little bit uncomfortable about it now being owned by a single vendor, I do think is slightly valid. It's almost as if corporations don't have great track records. Although saying that, I do think Cloudflare does. I haven't seen Astro go down the wrong path yet, but I suppose it is pretty early. But overall, I do think if anyone was going to buy Vite, Cloudflare is hardly the worst choice. Plus, a lot of my optimism comes down to Evan's track record. VoidZero has been enormously positive for the JavaScript ecosystem, so I trust the team to do right by that community. And on top of all of that, if you're still not happy, all of their licenses are MIT, so if one day Cloudflare does do something the community disagrees with, people can just fork Vite, and maybe we'll have a situation exactly like what happened with Redis and Valky. I would rather that didn't happen though. I'm genuinely curious what you think about this, not only the acquisition, but also the trend as a whole of these open source tools being bought. Let me know in the comments down below. While you're there, subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.